We all struggle with the imperfections in our character. Suppose you see a friend being bullied, but you don't stand up for them. Later on, you might feel guilty for lacking the courage to support your friend. Or suppose you bought a big bar of chocolate intended to last a whole week, but instead you eat it in a single evening. You may feel bad about your greed and lack of temperance. Or suppose you lie to your mom and tell her you were studying while you were actually watching Netflix. In this case, you might feel bad for your lack of honesty. While we might worry about other forms of imperfection, whether we're pretty enough or how clever we are, virtue ethicists are interested in our moral character, so in the extent to which we're honest, fair, or kind enough. Virtue ethics is an ethical theory that can help us get a clearer picture of what a morally good or virtuous person is. It tells us which aspects of character we should develop, those are called virtues, and which we should actively avoid, those are called vices. While other ethical theories, such as utilitarianism and the ontology, focus on how to distinguish right from wrong actions, what we should and should not do, virtue ethics focuses on the kind of person we should become. A good person is a virtuous person, someone who embodies admirable aspects of character. While different virtue ethicists list different kinds of virtues, the core idea is always the same. Virtues are stable dispositions that characterize a person and reliably predict what they will do. A disposition refers to a strongly ingrained tendency to feel, act, and react in specific ways. If you only keep your promises out of fear for being caught, you don't really possess the virtue of honesty. An honest person is a kind of person, someone who values the truth and someone you can trust and rely on. In a recent account of virtues, Linda Zagzebski defines these in terms of the emotions, desires, and dispositions possessed by moral exemplars, those people whom we admire for being morally excellent. Think of the kindness of Nelson Mandela, or the courage of Rosa Parks or Malala. On this account, kindness, courage, and honesty are virtues because these are the traits that moral exemplars possess. In his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, the Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that a good life is one that achieves eudaimonia, a Greek term that can be translated as human flourishing. According to Aristotle, virtues are character traits that help us achieve such flourishing. In his view, virtues always lie in between two related vices, one being an excess and another a deficiency. Courage, for example, is the ability to maintain motivation to work towards some goal in the face of danger or risk, like a firefighter rescuing people from a burning building despite the danger involved. The related vices here are cowardice, losing motivation too quickly, and recklessness, keeping motivation even when the risks make it unwise. If you are not a trained firefighter but run into a burning building despite the risks being huge, and the odds of rescuing those inside being very low, may count as recklessness rather than courage. If you develop all virtues, you will possess what Aristotle calls phronesis, or practical wisdom. If you're practically wise, you can recognize whatever is morally relevant about a situation and assess how to deal with it. This virtuous person then is a fully developed person, a person who flourishes. Think of your favorite football or tennis player. They have trained hard to develop their physical and mental capacities to the extent that they can quasi-automatically make the best possible decision on how to run and hit the ball. Just like they excel in their sport, a perfectly virtuous person excels as well. They embody perfectly developed capacities that enable them to know how to behave, not on a football pitch or tennis court, but in the field of morality. People like you and me are probably not fully virtuous. Perhaps we're not as courageous or kind as we should be, or we simply don't know what the practically wise thing to do is in any given situation. When that's the case, we can take our cue from the people we admire and ask, what would a virtuous person do? What would courage, kindness, honesty, or wisdom demand in this case? So why is virtue ethics an attractive ethical theory? What are its strong points? Well, virtue ethics is the first and most important ethical theory to focus on people and their characters. We all know that doing a good deed from time to time isn't enough to make you a good person. Unlike other ethical theories, virtue ethics captures this idea and rightly stresses the importance of a good character. Instead of trying to get as many of our actions right, we should all care about being and becoming better people. Doing good follows naturally from being a good person. If you manage to become courageous and honest, standing up against bullies and keeping your promises will come naturally to you. Virtue ethics also rightly stresses the importance of moral emotions, which other theories sometimes ignore. A virtuous person is not someone who coldly applies some impartial moral law. Instead, they feel compassion for those who suffer, anger in the face of injustice, and admiration for other virtuous people. So what are the arguments against virtue ethics? What are its weak points? First, virtue ethics has been criticized for not being helpful when it comes to deciding how to act. Suppose you're faced with a difficult moral decision. Suppose you find out that your work friend has been stealing small amounts of money from the business. Your friend promises that they will stop and asks you not to tell your boss. What should you do in this situation? Unfortunately, virtue ethics does not give a clear answer here. The virtue of loyalty seems to count in favor of not getting your friend into trouble. But the virtues of honesty and justice seem to count in favor of telling your boss. So what to do? According to a virtue ethicist, we need to use practical wisdom to determine the right action in this case. But this vague advice doesn't offer a lot of guidance. Second, virtue ethics has been criticized for being circular. A virtuous person is one that a virtuous person would do. But why would a virtuous person act like that? Because it's virtuous. This appears to be an unhelpfully circular account of what the virtues are. So what is the societal relevance of virtue ethics? How can it help change the world for the better? One important role that virtue ethics can play is in helping to improve people's moral characters. Virtue ethics have had an influential role on moral education, making children, but also adults, think about their moral exemplars and moral heroes can inspire and challenge them to become better people themselves. Perhaps you admire Nelson Mandela for his perseverance and ability to forgive, or you find Rosa Parks or Malala admirably courageous in fighting for justice and equal rights. In those cases, you can ask, what would Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, or Malala do? Such moral exemplars, like virtue ethicists rightly stress, can inform and guide and inspire you to become a better person yourself. We all struggle with the imperfections in our moral character. As virtue ethicists stress, that is only the starting point of a journey of character growth where we strive to become a better and ideally a fully flourishing and virtuous person.